Hi, this is Davin with Haggerty and Redline Rebuilds and Ben, and we're going to speak to our 1950 Chevy pickup, but specifically the Stovebolt Six 216. Glamorous, super high horsepower, phenomenal engine.
I think you said this earlier today. This is like probably our first, like, kind of completely stock rebuild.
Dead stock.
Every other thing that we've done some little tweak
Well, even the Model A, we put a high compression head. It's all a 6 now. But yeah, so this is dead bone stock, nothing else. But I think what's really interesting, and this picture paints a perfect scenario. This is the backyard. And it cracks me up, really this is like the third car in last, or the truck is, because in order of parking, this is the T-Bird's the first one out, because right there's the gate. They couldn't fit any more in. So this is a fairly new car into the...
Yeah, you wonder if he started up here, and then if you watch this whole location is from episode 59, I believe, of Barn Find Hunters. So if you want to go back and check that out, we talk about these cars, and then there's a whole bunch of other cars around back, which I think are generally newer than these cars.
Yes.
So it was like maybe he filled these up, or I don't know, there's a lot of stuff there. But yeah, this truck caught our interest.
Yeah, it caught my eye when we walked up the hill to be like, ooh, look at that.
So first things first was getting that T-Bird out of the way, which we ripped in half. The frame was completely rotted.
Yeah, the shoveling and earlier to get the T-Bird out. It was sunk into the ground up to the door, bottoms of the doors.
So a little more shoveling to get the truck out. Back to the shop.
And at that point, the only thing we knew was the motor would roll over.
Right.
By hand.
Now, there was a question on YouTube about the engines that we pick. Like how much or how thoroughly we inspect them before deciding.
Right about that much. Just about zero. Again, all we did with this one, remember we had to pry the hood. The latch was stuck on the hood. We pried it open and took a bar to it and got it to turn over. That's all we knew at that point. There was no fluid in the radiator. It was dry. We expected that was a good sign. Good sign, bad sign. And we got it over to the shop and basically proceeded to de-leaf it.
Leaf it, mouse nests, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
It's a cool looking truck.
It is.
And I think a lot of people appreciate that. Now, we'll talk about it a little bit more in the weeks to come, but again, sort of going back to some of the YouTube comments and what we've talked about in some of the updates is that we've talked about, we're going to get this truck back on the road.
Yes.
And I know there were a few people that were like, I wanted to see the truck drive, but it was a matter of we needed to get the video done, and we couldn't quite get everything all into one, but we're still working on the truck, which is up there right now.
We're not quite there.
And keep an eye out for more Redline updates. We'll talk about the truck. We got the transmission pulled apart. We'll be doing some more work on that. And you'll see it. It will go down the road.
Don't cross your fingers.
Once again.
It will go down the road. It might have a tow strap on it, but it will go down the road.
All right, so into the garage.
Yes.
Getting over that lip.
And if you're going to have a garage, don't put a lip right there going into it because, well, you can't bring casters up it. It's pain.
There's me being
you.
Weird.
First and foremost, we got to get to it, get the hood off, get everything out of the way. Now, at this point, I'm like, we're going to leave the front clip on. I'm not going to, well, it's on the ground.
Now, if you missed it, we did take a crack at getting this running before we pulled it all apart, and you should go back and check out that video. It's pretty
very
awesome.
Electrifying.
Davin gets shocked pretty good.
We got it rolling.
Anything in particular, just about?
Just as in general, we've gone through a couple different vehicles now in a wide age group. And this one kind of is interesting from the fact that, so it has a kind of a hybrid of a drivetrain, meaning you have the big cutoff is whether it has a torque tube, as far as how you get the power from the back of the transmission to the front of the axle, if it has a torque tube or it has a live shaft, or what we just call a drive shaft today. This really has, I'm almost going to call it both, meaning one end is a torque tube setup as far as how it's bolted to the back of the motor. It's physically bolted, there isn't a slip, but there's a slip later on in the drive shaft, so it's like kind of in between that side of things.
And speaking in between, this was 1950, the year right before they stopped doing the 216 and just went to the 235?
Yes. Yeah, there's a big change right after this to a 235. A little more displacement. They changed things up in the inside. Basically, they eliminated the Babbitt bearing for all intents and purposes. And then the side cover changes and some external stuff. But for the most part, it's the same motor, a little more displacement. And what I'm referring to is on this, right up here where you have the big spark plugs, where all the spark plugs in that, you have that huge cover. There's no reason for there to be a cover over the top of the spark plug area. And that's what their design iteration was later, is they eliminated and went to one, which what that does is it covers where the lifters are at and the push rods.
So this thing was dirty.
Yes. Very, very grimy.
We've been accused of not cleaning it off beforehand for whatever reason. Granted, we didn't take the pressure washer to it. We just hosed it down and gave it some good scraping.
Yeah, some scraping. And I thought we did pressure wash this, didn't we? Oh, no, it was a truck.
Yep. We'd already taken this apart by the time we got the pressure washer over here.
Yep.
All right, and...
Well, here we go. So that's interesting. So that back bar on there, so if this was a car, it would have a normal solenoid on the starter, electric solenoid and starter. This has a mechanical solenoid, and that apparatus that goes across there, that is the linkage. So you can, there's a pedal on the bottom of the floor that you push on, and that engages the starter. Purely mechanical. Which initially caught my surprise, and then later on I was looking at a 48 car and it had a solenoid. I'm like, oh, huh. I would have thought they would have done it the same, I guess. The bell housing was a pain in the butt to get off. Bolts come from both sides. It's, yeah. So you have to pull the pressure plate and the flywheel off before you can pull the bell housing.
Man, do we even test the horn yet?
I did test the horn. It has a little gravel in it. So, but I think it's an interesting place to mount the horn, right in front of where you're trying to bring fresh air in.
So similar to our Hemi and some other crusty engines that we brought in, everything was seized up pretty good.
Yeah, and there's certainly times where I jump to a torch quicker than maybe some others would, but I've kind of gotten tired of taking out busted bolts, so I've tried to minimize that, and when available, I get a torch after it or the inductive heater.
Now this is kind of interesting, and again, we're going over some of the stuff that we did cover in the Redline Updates, but just talk about the intake and exhaust manifold and kind of how that is situated. So
they're separate, truly separate pieces, but they are bolted together directly underneath the carburetor. And what it has is it has a...
Right here?
Yep. There's a flapper in there in OEM standpoint, this flapper that's basically a heat riser to warm up the air charge. So in cold temperatures, it will warm up quicker. It basically preheats the air coming in, so the truck engine will warm up quicker. But there are no true bolts that in a normal fashion where you would have a flange and you'd have bolt holes and you'd run a stud or a bolt in there to lock the manifold to the head. This is just like, it's just literally clamped. So the bolt holes are close enough, and there's like a little butterfly clamp that kind of goes over the top of it and just presses on it. So that in itself is like, oh, this is going to leak. Especially on the ends. That's not a broken stud. That's just a locator pin.
Right here.
Yeah, so there's nothing that holds that manifold down in that corner in a normal sense.
Which I'm sure if you wanted to, you could drill it out and
Oh, yeah,
stud it
yeah,
and
yeah.
whatever, but
Yeah.
if it worked fine then, it'll work fine now.
Yeah.
Or fine enough. More torching. Now there was some interesting plumbing on this.
Yeah, it had, that's a basically
you're working on right
that's
there.
an oil line. It comes out of the oil pump or the oil gallery line. Oil is really only on the right-hand side of this engine, or in this case, I should say, the right hand in the picture, but passenger driver's side. And so you have your main feed line there from your pump up. But the problem is there's no way to get oil from the down below up to the shaft rockers. So what they did is that line goes through the water jacket and then up underneath this cover. And when we pop the cover off, you'll see it. And then that goes up and then feeds that shaft. But initially I'm like, what in the world is this? A little heat and a little extra hand here, but to get the draft tube or the road tube off and the dipstick tube out. That's a cool shot with it.
Yeah. All right, it was grimy.
And here's our numbers and build date.
So there's that line coming through.
So B is February, 14th is the 14th of 1950. Is the breakdown on that casting number.
So what you were talking about earlier with that oil line on the other side comes through to right
Yes.
here
Yep.
and then goes up to the...
Yep, and then feeds that.
Nice.
It's a drip system. So it'd be brutal.
Now, at this point with kind of pulling this off, is there anything... Like we haven't done a...
But we had it running.
Right.
So it ran at this point. I mean, this is a running engine. Running, I mean, we didn't run fuel through the carburetor. We ran fuel down the carburetor, not through the carburetor.
And there's also no coolant in it
No
at
coolant,
all.
no. Well, for what we needed, we didn't need any coolant.
Right. Now, at this point, is there anything you're looking at that's just like, oh, this is cool, or this is weird, or this is interesting? Because we haven't done a straight
Right.
6 or straight 8 or anything like that at this point.
It's amazing how long the push rods are, because because the cam is in the center of the block, so it's overhead valve relative to the cam position. So you have that, all that type of stuff is normal, but the rods are, or the push rods are roughly 10 inches long instead of 6, so that's a lot of distance to make up. They're solid lifters. They got a weird shape. Instead of being just like a true pure cylinder, they look like a big wine goblet flipped upside down. Obviously that oil line going up is different. Most of the GM stuff that I've messed with to this point has never been shaft rockers. That's always like the Buick has it, and most of the Mopars have
There's
shaft
a good
rockers.
close-up
Yeah,
of
they're
the
perfect
lifters.
of the lifters. There's a lot of, that is a thick gunk on the side of that. It does look really funny that the timing covers like at this weird skew when you look at the front of the motor. The dampener and pulley's all one piece. That's a little different. It has the hand crank spur on it still, even into the 50s,
Which we used to test initially,
Yeah.
right, to make sure that the
yeah, to
engine
make
had
sure it would
turned
turn over. Yep. And then, yeah, and there's no bolt that holds it on. It's all pressure. At that point, this was all kind of normal. Oh, that's what it was. They're all flathead, not flathead, column slot flathead screws. So they're, just screws. They're not hex, which was interesting. And then here's your oil pump system is the first thing that you see. The pickup is separated from the oil pump itself. That has that crossover line. There is a oil on the side. You see the little loop of brass there, or copper. That's that external oil line. The open hole to the right, that's a pressure relief valve. So basically, as it has enough pressure, it relieves out and up to the separate oil filter that's the size of
Oh, that's
4
right.
coffee cans.
That's just completely bolted onto
yeah.
the side of the.
Yep. So you have separate
clip, the
lines
front
going
clip.
to that.
Yeah, it's kind of just interesting how they got oil everywhere
Yeah.
for this.
Yeah. They don't run a lot of RPM, so you don't need a lot of oil pressure. It needs oil to cool the valves and the springs and all, like everything. But I was surprised that was a 2-piece shaft. I was expecting it to be 1. From an engineering standpoint, it's better to be 2 because it's easier to make that shorter shaft straight than the longer one.
Was that something? Did we have to send that out? Like, what was the condition of that?
That actually was in really good condition. Relative to like the nail head, when we pulled that apart, remember the aluminum stands had wore tremendous grooves in that steel. This didn't have that problem for whatever reason. Either it didn't have the same amount of miles on it or what have you, but yeah, it didn't have that issue.
So it just went in the parts washer and came out and good to go.
Put it in the ultrasonic and cleaned it up and put a little Scotch-Brite to it just to take anything that was funny off of it.
I'm always amazed at putting stuff into that ultrasonic cleaner
Works great.
and what it comes
It works nice.
comes out as.
Yep.
Especially with the gunky stuff that we end up putting in
Yep.
there. All right. Nothing major at this point, right?
Yeah,
we're
nothing major
still
here. No, nothing. No real issues there. Everything moves free. Nothing looks horrible.
And you still have a
Lock and
couple
everything looks good.
lifters hanging out there that didn't come out.
Yeah, because they have enough sludge built up on the bottom side, they won't come out of the hole.
So you had
Basically,
to wait.
waiting for the camshaft to be out and then just
Yeah.
push them out the bottom instead.
Now, did we order new ones for that or use
Yes.
the same ones?
No, brand new.
Oh yeah, more flathead.
Yeah, more
screws
flathead.
there.
This plate is the back side, if you will, of the timing has its own cover instead of the block because of the way it hangs out like that. So then it's interesting because there is the camshaft's held in with a plate, which is relatively normal, but then you have this big plate, but then there's also a set of bolts that come from through the rear or the front main into the bottom of that plate. It was just really.
Which access through those.
Well, you have access through the big timing gear, which is one of those nylon, phenolic or whatever material it is, and then like just a steel bottom gear, and that quiets things down, and that is what that's for. But like to get to this point or to get all that off of there, you'd have to pull the oil pan and to get that cover off because there's bolts that come in from the inside out, and it's like, well, why wasn't something tapped, But whatever. The water pump on this is really puny as well. Not nearly as substantial as most.
So everything,
traditional
grimy, but
2-bolt. Yep.
and this is at this point too. The rod journals are Babbitt, but the
Right, which on that first picture
mains.
when we first pull the oil pan off and the rods are still in it, you can see it has dippers. So it has a couple things that are different, like going back to like the Model A that had dippers as well. So dippers meaning the rods get their oiling from splashing into the pan and grabbing oil with that. This has a slightly different system. Is that the pan, and I don't think we see it until later on, but that pan flipped up and looking at the bottom, like into the oil reservoir portion of it, there are little squirters. So and you can see the one to the far right there in the dead center, that's the oil line that feeds those squirters in the pan. But the idea is
you're
that
talking about these right here.
correct.
Yeah.
Yep, the one to the right there. Well, so basically, as your oil pump is creating pressure, or volume, it basically pushes through those squirters, and it shoots a steady stream up ideally into those pickups. Which there's a pretty elaborate tool to set in there and actually run water through those squirters and make sure it hits through the hole. And kind of interesting setup, but certainly critical if you want it to live oil-wise. And the rods are Babbitt bearing from the factory opposed to insert bearings.
All right, off to Thurlby we go. Get this grimy thing cleaned up.
Yes. I left him a couple plugs in there just to I don't want Mark to feel like he didn't have anything to do.
And so, I mean, it's obviously getting the rest of this stuff disassembled and then cleaned up is and I guess we don't really show it here,
nice
but we get into it obviously in the Redline updates, but there were some issues with the heads in particular.
The biggest issue was with our head. The bore and the cylinder bore and that was good as far as cleanup at 30 thou. We ran into a piston issue when we go to reassemble it. That's another. We'll get there.
Yep.
And then, but then we had on the heads. These heads are kind of a known issue as far as they crack. Mm-hmm. And we were 6 for 6 as far as cracking was concerned. So from that aspect, these cylinder heads are cracked. We pressure tested them. They're a surface crack at this point. That crack is only going to get bigger. There's no secret behind that. But we made the decision that based on its usage, it's not going to see this engine is not going to be intended for any kind of
long
we're not going to run great race with this across the country.
Yep.
So we opted for I don't want to say permanent temporary repair of putting some ceramic sealer inside of that cylinder head.
So Mark's doing what we see Mark do pretty much on all of our stuff here. We're getting new guides, what else?
New guides, new seats. Everything was pretty well shot. So goes through, cuts the old seats out, presses in new seats. On this cylinder head, they're very workable from that aspect. Now there is about zero to gain from them on a performance standpoint, so I took no extra time in that aspect. Over onto the Surdy.
It's funny this time around. There's usually, we're usually working on V8s.
Yeah.
And so when I go to Thurlby to shoot this stuff, it's always like, oh well, we'll shoot one of the heads and then we'll
one head doing this and one head doing that.
Right, exactly, and kind of either do two things at once or like we'll just shoot one and then say, oh yeah, go ahead and do the other work. We're not coming back. We just want to shoot one head sort of thing. And this time it was.
I know there was several times I commented relative to the cylinder heads as well.
There are a whole lot of people concerned about the mushroom on that.
That tool that
on that.
that punch has been used a fair amount.
I think they're more concerned for Mark's safety. For a piece busting off of it and hitting him.
Remember the camshaft tool that was on mushroom door?
Mm-hmm. So this stuff. Every time we go to Thurlby, I just am mesmerized by all the stuff. I mean, and they're cranking through this stuff every single day.
Yeah.
And everything from modern Subaru stuff to
huge diesel heads.
Yep. Yeah. From front end loaders and trucks and everything else. It's pretty cool.
We should do one of the big 4-valve diesel heads.
Yeah.
Deal.
All right, so this gets cleaned up some more. I think there might be a shot here of Mark. Yep, here's our pressure test.
All right. So this is before we put any ceramic in it. So basically put a little pressure to it, look for leaks. He has soaped it up, look for any leaks around those cracks. Like I said, every one of the cylinders in the combustion chamber had a leak. And this Moroso stuff is pretty typical, like in all your marine applications. So it's not anything new.
Mm-hmm. But we let that sit for a good week.
A good week at least, yeah. And he rotated it and kind of tumbled things around in there. And a lot of stuff, it wasn't plugged in the fashion of nothing would leak back out because you do need some air to get in there, but but basically rotate around, and where it was critical, had tape across it and that sort of thing. Once we got our cast pistons off the shelf that looked like they had been there since 1950, we were able to do the final hone.
And it was tight
Here.
anyway, which was interesting with the cast.
Yes.
It's like even though we sized everything
Right.
and did it correctly.
Yep.
And
Yep.
we can
So,
talk about that as we
yeah,
get into
so
it.
the difference in this is we typically are doing aluminum pistons. And obviously aluminum pistons, they that material swells more than steel does relative to heat. So that's why there's extra clearance relative to those. But it's still odd to be putting cast pistons on, like, these things don't, it's like, this is super tight.
Yep. Now this next shot is something we haven't done before, haven't shown before. But this was the flywheel getting turned.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Right?
I didn't know we shot that.
Yeah.
Nice.
That was the day you weren't there. It was just me and
That's right.
me and Mikey.
I was off somewhere.
No, that was cool.
Yeah.
It also made it nice and shiny too, which was cool. All right, off to get some paint.
So with every motor, wash it down with Dawn dish soap in a hot bucket of water, hose it down, run the
Oh, that's cool there. I didn't notice that the
Oh,
first
yeah.
time, the drying.
brushes down the oil galleries, all the stuff that the hot tank gets loosened up, but not necessarily completely taken out, and then of course do all the drying aspect here. And you want to thoroughly wash everything out, obviously, and blow it all off and such. And then that is the perfect point to where you can tape things off and get paint to stick, because there's no assembly lube anywhere, and it's nice and clean.
As opposed to assembling it and then
Right.
going and painting
Yeah.
it. I got to help you out a little bit on this one.
Yeah,
I
I tell you what,
made it-
that two
made it-
hands really make this job go quicker. Otherwise, evidently I'm really slow at this because it takes me about 4 hours to do it on my own.
Otherwise, I just stand there
Yeah.
on my phone. And I figured, hey, I'll chip in, help out here, not make you do all
Yep.
the work. But it's fun. It's fun learning that stuff, figuring it out.
How do you like that Daryl found a Pennzoil sun to stick up in the back corner?
Perfect.
On his own. He's like, I got this. I'll put this up there. In the paint booth, everything's wiped down with wax and grease remover. That's what that last piece across on the oil pan. And then a primer sealer setup gets sprayed on everything.
Which happens to also be gray.
Yep. Well, you use different colors of that based on whatever your top coat's going to be. In this case, it made best sense to use that. So we have the big, we got all the tin work in the head and the bell housing and of course the block.
Now, we get this question every time.
Yep.
What kind of paint are we using?
We use a single stage with a clear coat. Even though the single stage does not need a clear coat, we put a clear coat on top of that for extra durability and gloss and beauty.
And it looks good.
It looks really good.
does.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
hopefully, maybe someday, some of you out there will get to see some of these engines in person. But they are really, really pretty. All right, back to the shop.
The magical tape.
People always love these shots.
Yep.
It only takes a couple hours to do them.
Especially
although it
when
works
you get
out
the
because
springs and the,
it works out because it's the days where like you're out getting parts or
Yep.
you're in the background working on getting something ready for a shot, and then I'll just be in there, click, move, click, move, click,
Exactly.
move, and the whole process.
and away we go on the head assembly.
Yeah.
Normal stuff. Mark does all the hard work as far as getting all the clearance is right, and I do a last double check every once in a while. Well, you can see I have a reamer out there. I did get a couple of them that were a little stickier than I wanted, and just do a quick cleanup on those. Check all the valve springs as far as the installed height is concerned. Add shims where needed, which is standard process.
And again, if you're interested in a little more detail on that stuff, you go in one of the Redline Update episodes.
Yeah, we get very detailed in it.
Goes detailed into setting all that stuff.
Biggest thing is know what you need, know what your specs are, take your time, put them together.
Anything at this point as far as like parts availability, anything like that that was weird?
No, actually everything was available from that standpoint. Actually, I had Joey at Thurlby's just order everything this time around. Lots of times I'll kind of do my own search, and then this one it made sense just to have him grab everything since everything was just dead stock, whatever the book said.
Right. Yeah, it can be a little bit trickier, and there are other ones where you want things a particular way.
Stay here for just a second. So this one is an interesting shot. The valves all have like a different, I don't know, typically the valves are somewhat all in the same, call it plane. And you kind of see it here, they're all kind of crisscrossed. And then the exhaust valves are the ones with a much longer tip on them.
Okay, yeah, so the difference here
what
between
hangs out,
here
and that's all relative to clearance to the shaft rocker assembly, but it's just different. I mean, it's just an interesting. Initially, when you're looking at it, you think you expect to see everything very symmetric and laying the same height, and then you look at this and you're like, oh, did I get wrong valves?
Yeah.
But
now, what's the thing on the side there? Is that for water neck?
that big open smiley face
Yeah.
there? That is, that's the water neck, and it has, so you have a neck that comes up, and then your thermostat sits in that, and then another neck that goes to the radiator.
Okay.
Normally, you would have basically just a spot in the intake manifold or whatever that he would hold it, the thermostat. It's even self-winding.
Yeah, it's fun watching it frame by frame.
Now, when this thing was completely assembled, I thought it was going to self-wind, unwind when you'd roll it upside down. But. So popping in the freeze plugs using the Permatex again. Now this shot we'll let you. I don't know if we talked about this in any of the rebuilds.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about this.
The updates. So there are two quote unquote extra holes
right
in
here.
this block. Pretty good size
and
one.
right here.
It's a 3/4 pipe and a 1/2 inch pipe. Those were the highly sought after stock option. This deems it high performance. They are what appeared to be bullet holes in the side of this block. Now, I don't know how they got there, and all I'm saying is bullet hole being it was a fairly, about a pinky sized hole, but it blew the back side of the out. So something, in my mind, punctured the sidewall and popped out. Now, that's probably why there was no water in the radiator and all that, but I don't know where they came from. There are no holes relative to the body because the body's got it all covered up. I'm going with bullet holes. That's what they look like.
It makes for a way cooler story.
There's no other holes. Like there's no damage relative to the cylinder bore on the inside. None of that. So thankfully, this block is not that heavy as far as like a V8 type block. I mean, it's still heavy, but I was able to hoist this up onto a Bridgeport at a friend's machine shop and used a Bridgeport to get everything squared up, and then basically used a mill to open that hole up because it wasn't a perfect hole, and the drill bit would have just made a really nasty triangular shaped hole where a mill will come in and really clean that up. So I took a mill, got that round, the hole round, and then used the drill bit to size relative to the pipe plug.
Okay.
And then of course hand tapped it from a pipe plug standpoint. And that cylinder wall, there's about 3 to 4 threads in there, which is as much as there is in the other ones. They have a little more boss, but again, it'll be fine. It doesn't build up a bunch of pressure.
And then those, you just put basically the Teflon coating on those plugs and.
Yep, Teflon them in, and on startup everything was fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to know what put
Yeah,
those, officially what put
I
those
don't know
holes
what
there.
officially, but my story is it was bullet holes.
For sure.
Small caliber, by the way. It wasn't anything huge.
All right, a little more stop motion here, having some fun. Now that box was something cool.
That box is awesome. Again, I think this Hastings box is from 1950. They must have made like their last run and said, we're not ever going to service this motor again. The packaging was all like a different, even texture of paper. It's really interesting from that standpoint. Not only that, but the rings themselves had a really unique design relative to what we're used to. And so do the rods, and you can see that here in this picture. So the rods have, they're typically speaking, we've used one of two types of pistons. A floating wrist pin where there's clips going into the pistons that hold the wrist pin from coming out, and they float on the rods, or the rods are press fit, the wrist pin press fits to the rod. These are actually bolted down. So you slip it in. I'm sure there's a gauge out there like this squirter gauge, but you basically just eyeball, or what I did is eyeballed the centering of the rod into the piston, and then of course the wrist pin relative to the piston. And then you torque this down. I think that number was 35 foot-pounds. And you torque that down, and that's what holds the wrist pin. You can certainly see why they changed the direction at some point, because it wouldn't take much not to have enough torque on there, and then that wrist pin slides out and runs right through your cylinder wall.
Right. Now, fortunately, during that process, we cloned you.
Yep. I had a double and almost a tripling up at some points here, but yes.
If you play back fast enough,
Yep.
popping back and forth. So, a lot going on here. Part of which is what you just talked about, is you're assembling the rods onto the pistons and doing that. So right there, even you're
Yes, correct.
the U on the right is getting that assembled. And then what are you doing on the left?
On the left, I'm taking all the rings, putting them into the respective bores, and setting that in clearance. And then in the back at the vise, I have the ring filer back there, so cleaning that up a little bit and setting that ring gap exactly where I want it relative to their specs.
Now,
Which weren't anything out of the ordinary, given that they're a cast ring.
Yeah.
But,
now if people did catch
yeah.
the fact that there were two of you, but I just want to point out my fun thing, which is you picking up the coffee cup here, taking a drink, setting it down, and then the other you picking it up and drinking it. I'm pretty proud of that shot.
that shot turned out really
just
really
having
well,
some fun.
for sure. I'm not sure who had that idea, but man, it was a great idea to do that shot. Standard procedure: go through, check the bearings. As far as size are concerned,
Speaking of bearings,
torque everything down. Yes, so we switched these, like I said initially. So the main bearings are insert bearings from the factory. The rod bearings were Babbitt. I chose on this to go away from the Babbitt and put in, have these rods cut and use inserts. One of the things I struggled with during the assembly into things, as I was contemplating mechanical situations, was oh no, did I forget to do something relative to the crankshaft to accommodate the insert bearings? So in normal fashion, insert bearings need to be pressurized. Where Babbitt, like we had with the Model A, or I'm sorry, like you would have to do with the Model A. Our Model A we kept with the Babbitt. Babbitt bearings, dippers are common. That is the only way to get oil to them. So I had a moment of, oh no, what have I done? And had a deep conversation with the company that supplied the rods that was, hey, are you sure I don't need to cross drill the crankshaft? I don't need to do any kind of oil, blah, blah, blah. And they assured me multiple times that no, I do not need to do anything more than that. You can see that bearing has an obnoxiously huge hole in it. That lines up perfectly with that dipper or catch cup, if you will, because of the squirters coming up. So it's
All
like,
sorts of things
okay,
going on
I
in
will
there.
leave this in your hands, and I will stop guessing what you've been doing for years and just assemble it. So that's what we did.
All right,
In
moving
our
on.
cam tool, the cam bearing tool, we are now, is this the third motor with that cam tool?
I think so.
This is I think it's the third motor with the cam tool. The Model A doesn't count because there's no cam bearings in it.
Yep.
So third motor with the cam tool, and we are now 3 for 3 in using the initial cam bearings.
Right tool for the right job. man.
Well, we were using the right tool. We're using a better tool for the right job, or the same job. So our numbers are up.
No extra set of cam bearings anymore.
Joey loves getting the call, though.
All right, this is something that we introduced on the Model A,
Yep.
and in similar fashion.
Yeah, we've done this on a couple other motors, but not as prevalent. So with talking, you learn something with every engine build, and you learn something with every person that you talk with. So when we were talking with BJ at Ron's Machine Shop on the Model A, I caught that he paints every bare surface with Gliptol. And I'm like, hey, why do you do that? So on and so forth. This doesn't, my understanding was always it was to help improve oil flow back to the pan.
Basically
not-
making a smoother surface.
Yeah, making a smoother surface, just clean it up, get that flow better. In the valley of a V8. Now, on some engines, they need improvement there. So I'm like, this motor doesn't need that, the Model A. And he said, well, we do it for reasons, the fact that the motor sits 99% of the time with really long stretches of time in between running and not getting oil splashed up, and you have a lot more bare surfaces, and now you start getting surface rust because you have temperature variations. Even in a controlled room, you still have moisture, and that helps eliminate that rust buildup. You don't have any rust. You don't get any washing of that, just the grains, if you will, like an asphalt roof. You don't get your granular particles coming off of there and then into the pump and then subsequently through. Because the filtration systems on these old motors is suspect at best. Even though they might have a huge filter.
All right. Doing some more of your checks here.
Yep. And back to the glip skull, I get a little more concerned about the top end of the motor opposed to the bottom end where the oil's sitting. So if anybody wonders why there's none on the bottom end, that's why. Here we're going through, putting all the main bearings in, checking them all for size. And once I'm happy with that clearance, the way we rip as far as an assembly standpoint, using the Redline lubricant for engine assembly, which works really nice. Again, that stuff doesn't move. It stays right there.
There's your dippers
There's the dippers.
or catchers, whatever you want to
Yeah,
call
I'm
them.
not sure which they are. Yeah. Here's that pan going back on as far as the back side of the timing. It was critical to put the, how we installed crankshaft goes in first, but then the camshaft has to follow, just because you start to get into I can't get to this part if I put this part in. And with no chain, you also have to line that up at that time, because both gears are pressed onto those shafts.
Okay, and you see the little blue and the red dots there on the...
Yep. Yeah, that is not aligned at this point. That is just in the position that it happened to rotate, but you set them both at where the gears meet. You'll line them up as normal.
Yeah, they're moved because you're moving it around to
Yeah,
get the pistons in. So let's see, was it number 5?
Was 5 or?
I think it was 5.
Yeah, it was
the second
5.
to last one,
Right
because
here.
I had a shot set to do the whole
Yep.
thing.
Yep.
But then if you were watching any of the
Yes.
Redline updates, we've had a piston that would
So
not fit.
yeah, so afterwards as we were going through this, we have them all labeled. We've done everything right. We've checked all of because we ran into problems with a ring being packaged wrong before. So we ran through. We did all of our ring sets. Blah blah blah. We've handled these pistons multiple times. Mikey went through and measured every one of them. when they initially got them because the box was pretty weathered. And so at this point we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 in, and we were just talking about how tight fit the cast pistons are relative to the cast bore because of the heat expansion piece.
Yep.
And this is where I go, well, this is actually after we got the next piston. So I take that piston out of the box, it's number 5, set it in the hole, and I'm like, Ben, you're not going to believe this.
You set it on top of the hole.
On top of the hole, yeah. It did not go in the hole. It was 30 thousandths bigger than it was supposed. It was a 90 or it was a 60 or a 90 thou opposed to a 30 over.
Yeah.
So it was a no-go. A quick, frantic call, and we had a piston the next day actually. So
Yeah, worked out.
worked out well. And then we changed shots
Yep.
and
We
proceeded.
made it work.
And proceeded. So
There's some more of your flathead
yeah.
screws there.
I forget, those have because those are Phillips and regular. I forget what the hardware store, they call them a certain name as well.
So now you're getting back into your tricky oil
Yep.
plumbing system here.
Yeah, so you
with
have
stuff going every
yeah,
which
you have
way.
lines to line up. One is copper, one's steel. One's got that big adapter that goes in for the filter or the pickup that bolts to the main. There's a lock so that what holds the pump in instead of a bolt down is it has a
Inside here.
Yeah, it has there's a recess ring on the shaft of the housing. When it goes down in that bore, then there's basically a set screw that comes in from the side to hold it.
Yeah. And I remember
Fairly intricate from
when we took it apart, you and I were both sitting there for a good
yeah.
20 minutes being
How
like,
in the world does this come out? But because everything was covered in gunk, you couldn't see it. Yeah.
all right, a little more tape action. We could probably sell this tape for a good bit of
Sure
money,
we could.
but right now it's proprietary.
Yeah. So there's
Okay,
our
yep.
there's our squirters.
Here, that
going
shows
in.
a good,
Yep.
that right there.
So right there, so you have the tube on the far right hand, the bigger tube, that goes into that area in the block. That's fed by the oil pump, and then it disperses down this line, which was really plugged full of gook. And then, yeah, it literally squirts a stream for the dippers, catchers to snag as it's rotating around. So it's not a time thing, it's just constantly, it's not like an injector, it's just a constant spray of oil. And everything bolts in with screws, more flathead screws.
But then you had those weirdo clips that you had to
Yeah, those clips
pop
are
in
a
there
pain.
too. The last one, I think, in particular.
Yeah, that one for some reason, I
Giving
don't
you
know what it
fits.
was. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
And what we don't show there is taking that gauge and setting on there and all that jazz. And
Fuel pump.
I think I rebuilt everything on this as far as pieces, parts, because fuel pumps were not available. They were on back order. And I wanted to make sure I had the glass top piece because I think those are really cool. So I bought a rebuild kit, cleaned everything up through the parts washer, and it works phenomenal. I mean, it was no leaks,
Yep.
pumping like that. When we plumbed it the right way, because initially I had it plumbed backwards. Whatever. Somebody might say, well, how do you plumb it backwards? It's got to come in the back and go out the front. Well, if you have the whole body rotated, which I did, and whatever. Small problems.
Just got a rebuild kit for this, nothing in particular.
No, just basically want to go through everything and de-gunk it, because everything had, I don't know, it was almost like it was sprayed with tar.
Yep.
So, yeah, went through and cleaned everything up, re-lubed everything, put a new pin in. That was kind of a pain getting that gear off. That's like a pin that goes in, and it's mushroomed down. I replaced it with a roll
You can
pin.
see you'd
Yeah, the grind marks on there to get that head off. Yeah, because I needed to pull everything apart, and that's why we went through it. I wanted to check and make sure the bushing was good after it was cleaned up, and it was fine. Cleaned the housing all up nice, and all the retainer plates for the points and all that stuff was fine. Obviously, put in fresh points. I put a new condenser in it because I might as well start 100. 100% fresh. Rotor and a cap.
Oh, because you would put a new condenser in it when we went to
Right.
fire it
Yeah,
up.
exactly.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep. So here's our fuel pump. Right now it looks like it's right side, it's actually on correctly, which it is on correctly. But it always, when the engine is right side up, it looks like the fuel pump is upside down to me. But
Some more of your
here goes all those
screws there.
screws. Yeah. That black cap, that's the oil relief area, like we mentioned. In the very back, that is just a pepcock for the oil or for the water. That's nothing more than that. Yeah.
This right
In
here.
case somebody's wondering, there was one in there from the, I'll say, factory, and they're a good idea anyway, especially if you're gonna maintain it. I mean, you should drain it and replace coolant. It makes it easy way to do things.
Now, we were, if I remember correctly, we were on the hunt for some head bolts.
Yeah, we had something. What was it? We had 2 bolts that were different lengths, and they got left in the back.
Right.
Because I had went through and kind of said, all right, these are all the head bolts that we need.
Yep.
Set them in the holes, and I don't know, somehow they got set off to the side.
Yeah. But we found them.
Yeah.
And those all have your coating on them, right? Your
Yes.
manifold dressing
Yep,
coating.
manifold dressing, and then use the venom inductor to
Sitting
treat 'em.
top
Yeah,
left
yeah,
of the
exactly.
video
Yep.
there. We've done that. And that's again in one of the, you walk everybody through that in one of the Redline Rebuild updates.
And this is where things start to get heavy on that stand. They're like, is this going to flip over? It's very top heavy from that aspect. Lifters in, same assembly lube, and then the push rods, making sure you get, you want to have oil or assembly lube between the contact points, so the end of both the lifters. There is a upside down and a right side up and an upside down. There's a cup on one end and a inverted on one end and concave on the other. So
Now here comes the copper line for the oil through the block.
correct.
And then that was a little nerve-wracking because you had to bend that every which way.
You had to bend. Yeah, it has to bend up through there. Of course, it's old. It's going to be brittle to some extent, and you can see we had to desolder it to take it out, and I had so that I knew I had it in, I'll say, the right position. This probably should have been done before we put the lifters in, but at the same token, it didn't hurt anything. Put a fine tip torch on it later on here anyway, and then soldered that in. But there was some concern of, well, you're sealing off the water jacket relative to the oiling system, and unless you have a major leak, how are you gonna know? I mean, quite honestly. The long studs serve 2 purposes. Not only are they two of the hold downs relative to the whole shaft, but then you also have the
long studs for these.
Yeah, once you put I don't know if it's considered a castle, acorn nut. You put an acorn nut up on top, and that's what holds the valve cover and everything down as well. So here's that routing, and it had to be a tight rotation. I mean, everything was tight to get it underneath the pan, and it had to be in a certain spot, which actually, this is not the right spot. We changed it right here after that.
Yeah, I can't remember if it shows it or not, but the pan.
It shows it right before we put the cover on. You'll see it. But yeah, that was a guess where it was supposed to be at that point.
We could have probably referenced our images from before, but it's just something we weren't thinking about.
No. So here's
which we did a lot of in this one. Which is the nice thing about. I mean, you've said in some of the DIY videos and stuff that you've done of like take a picture. So when before you take it apart, so you know how it goes back together.
Yep.
And fortunately, we have about 10,000 photos of everything that we did.
Serves very, very well. Water pump freshly painted. Water neck freshly painted.
There's your thermostat.
Clear silicone on all the gaskets, just extra. Any imperfections in that surface helps out. I put a little Gliptol on that particular part because it seemed to have a lot more rust than anything else did, so that was one area. going through and setting all the valve lash, in which we do and there's also an update on that, specifically on how to do that. And I get the question constantly, hey, will that method work on my, you name it? And yes, haven't come up with one. I haven't found an engine that doesn't work on. So go, if you're questioning what we're talking about, find that episode and
Now there's
update episode.
difference in how you set that based on solid lift or
No.
hydraulic lifter, or no, it's
Nope.
the same.
All the same.
Just to whatever spec it says.
Opens, close. So yeah, or where it's at on the cam, I should say. So there you can see we changed that routing is a little bit different on that copper line. But we have our valve lash set. Now I set this to the actual owner's manual, the real owner's manual from 1950 has usable information in it. It is not full of 55 pages of warnings and liability garbage.
Tells you how to actually work on your.
Actually
on
tells
your
you what you need to know about your vehicle, and one of which I got the spec out of that book relative to setting the valve lash as far as what it needs to be. And that lash was set. I set it to the heavy duty side of things, which is a little bigger gap. It was like 4 thousandths more gap. And the reason I did that is on the break-in side of things, put a little less stress on all the components initially. Okay. And I'm going to go back through, and it was pretty clacky from that aspect. So I'll go back through and tighten that up for the usage it's going to see. And then on goes the big side cover, and in goes the plugs and the coil and draft tube, dipstick, and of course the distributor last.
There's your two-piece.
Here's the two-piece manifold, how it all bolt. There's a seal that goes in between them. Now, with all these manifolds that have that flapper in there, you will, at least in my experience, you will pay hell to try to get the flappers to function. I wedge them all open, either weld them or closed, because it's like,
You're not going to be starting
I'm not
this up
starting
in
at minus 40.
dead of winter.
So the most these will see is maybe 30 degrees or 40 degrees at the most.
And it's going to be stored where it's warm, so it's not like it's
Exactly.
sitting outside and the whole thing's that temperature.
Yep.
I like the two-tone that you did with the coating on that. Now
That is Cerakote. So the guys down at West Michigan Cerakote, Drew and Spencer, do a fantastic job for us on those, and it is a very good coating. It's not a huge, like a thick buildup coating, so your part doesn't get all fluffy or
bulbous.
muddy. Yeah, it doesn't do that. I mean, it shows the rust. I mean, if you're trying to hide all the rust markings, from time, then probably not what you want. But in our case, I like it. You don't have to worry about big buildup like in the holes, all that. The threads, nothing's an issue. And it holds up very well. Here we're putting on our stencil of a, because this is considered a Thrift Master.
Which was fun when we were cleaning it up to see the remnants of the decal that used to be on there.
Yeah. Well, in that case, it was actually, those were painted in the day, but yeah.
Which,
We
if
didn't
we
take-
had
we
time,
should've
it would have
taken
been
time, I guess,
fun
to
to
do
have somebody come and
Yeah.
paint it on like they did for the Harley
Yeah.
and the Hemi. Although I don't think anybody actually ever saw the Hemi.
Nobody's seen the Hemi yet?
Someday we'll do an update once that goes into
Yes, we will.
into a car.
So generator's been all rebuilt. That's what we're putting on, obviously, to the right-hand side. The horn's clean. Air cleaner back up on top.
With a nice little touch.
I had to
with the
do a
red.
little touch, yep. I needed some offset color up there. And that oil filter, or the air filter, is kind of funny because it's nothing more than like really coarse steel wool. So you just kind of repack it in there, and that's that.
All right, and there she is. Looking good.
Yes. So some people will ask, hey, why is it called a Stovebolt? And the nickname's based off of the valve cover. It looks like the top of a stove. And the acorn nuts and all that.
It's so, especially when it's sitting on the stand, and especially since we've done so many V8s, and then the only other like non V8 that we've done is the Volkswagen or the motorcycle or whatever.
Right.
But it's different. I mean, just the way that it sits and
It's really tall and it's super narrow.
Yep.
I mean, in relative to like proportions. So
all right. So
pretty cool.
obviously,
Now we take the jump. Normal standpoint, I think we talk about this. Normally, I'd put this in the test stand.
Yep.
And fire it up just to avoid some problems. Well, given how this thing mounts into the vehicle, it's a fair amount departure from the rest of them. So instead of going through time-wise and making all the mounts in that,
making the mounts to fit
onto the test stand.
test
yeah.
stand.
I kept looking at the truck going, I got the 2 frame rails and the 2 cross members. It seems like I have the test stand right there.
Right.
So that's exactly what we did. I just set it down into that because I had the front fenders off at this
Yeah.
point.
And you can see here,
Yeah, part of the test stand is there.
and we did our own sort of
Yep.
modifications. And if you saw down there were some other clamps
Yeah,
and things.
it's the radiator
Holding stuff
stand
on.
is clamped to the frame rails and to the bumper. And then again, we're just mocking everything up to get it to run or to start it up and break it in.
Now,
And there's
Of
that
our 50
beautiful,
truck.
huge.
It is only
Oil
temped
filter.
in, meaning
yeah, that we also rigged to a C stand
Yes.
in the back because we didn't have a fender to bolt it to.
Yep.
But you do what you got to do.
Yep.
Although you did get those nice sticker decals, which was pretty cool.
Yes.
That went on both the air cleaner and on the oil pump, so it's looking very stock and very
Correct.
official.
Yep. Now I know we talk about it in the update. That's actually what well, I guess this is part of the end of the build there's no floor in it anymore. So the green hose, I like to supply water or have water available to help moderate or mediate
Yeah.
that temperature. I can never get enough airflow to cool an engine down as I'm breaking it in, regardless of, I have that huge 3-foot fan, I mean, all that type of stuff. It's just not the same as going down the road. So what I found works really well is if you crack the bottom hose and run it outside and put a little cooler water in, you can regulate that temperature if you need to. Initially too, remember I said the mechanical pump works fantastic. I pre-charged though everything with a little electric fuel pump.
I don't need to spin the motor a bunch.
And that was just not to turn that 6-volt starter over 4,000 revolutions to get fuel.
Yeah, and I mean, generally you have that switch wired up. And
Yeah.
This is purely a test stand function here. We
Yes.
weren't ready to have this thing in there anyway. Oh, there you go. There's the
Yeah, that's the fill up from the electric pump.
which is cool seeing that little glass
Yeah.
thing fill up. And I think what we didn't show was we had a couple little things that needed to be tightened up. We had some fuel
Yeah.
shooting some places, but
Yeah, we had fuel shooting. We had oil leak. The canister on the oil filter, I didn't have it quite tight enough, and it was just all over the sides.
all right, so we'll get some audio going in here now for. Okay, have you been able to hear it the whole time? Good. Got Matt back there running our live stream for us. And here we go.
See how much that starter shakes out of the truck? And that was real close to live time.
Yep.
I mean, this was not an hours later of messing around. This
It
was
wasn't the Hemi.
no. This was the initial fire. But you can see on the side of the car, for whatever reason, the carburetor just wants to leave.
How about that? She purrs nice.
So, and I am joyous.
They can hear everything right now, even
Gotcha.
though we kind of can't.
So there's, I mean, in any project, whatever it is you take on, there's a point in that project where you're like, is this ever gonna run again, or am I ever going to complete it, or whatever it is. And then when that instant of completion happens, in this case, it's when the engine fires up, you're like, yes, the joyous moment.
For sure.
It is sweet music.
The fun thing with this is that we're going to have two of those moments, because sitting up there right now is the truck. You got the floor pans in, which probably next week, if not the week after, you'll see an update on kind of where Davin is with the rest of the project. And there's a couple things that we have to do in terms of, we got to do brakes, we got to do some stuff with the transmission, we got to check out the rear diff, make sure all that fun stop and go stuff.
Mount those front fenders back on.
That too, because the rust had its way with quite a few parts of the body. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, it's rolling. And it idles down. I mean, I'm usually not big into I like to have motors that make a lot of racket, right? But between this and the Model A, they've both done the same thing now. These are not racket motors.
Yep.
Right? So this idles down to about 450 and just purrs.
Yep.
It doesn't, it's nice. It is nice. It's exactly what we're after with this one.
All right. So we got a couple questions from some viewers.
Shoot.
We'll answer those, and then we'll be good to go.
What do you got?
First one, it says, I do have a question for a later part in the video. If the head has a crack and it is not capable of repair, what would be a replacing possibility?
Well, actually, even with this head, I'm going to loosely say anything's repairable. Okay, I mean, I know that's a pretty bold statement, but in the situation where these are cracked in the combustion chamber. Now, cast iron can be welded. It's a very specific process because you have to cool it really slowly. So you need to bring that temperature down. Otherwise, the temperature dissipates too fast and the area that you welded will crack. Really, probably worse than what the initial crack was. The other option that I'm aware of is you take that crack and there's a very patented screw that you actually run screws and overlap them and stitch that crack shut. I've used that on external cracks and blocks on a few different occasions. I've done them in the intake. Some of the 90s Chevys, they'll crack along the lifter bore area, and that can be done with that to fix that. Now, if you get into a situation where, I don't know, you have a golf ball size hole and you don't have the part, yeah, you're probably not gonna weld that back up. If it's the only one in existence, you're gonna figure out how to fix that part. Or you can spend a lot of money and have it duplicated. I mean, they made it one time, they can make it two times. On this particular motor, you might be able to get a 235 head on here, I'm not sure. So you could go to some other option relative to that, but you'd have to do a lot of.
I'm sure some Stovebolt person out there will say.
Oh yeah,
check the comments on if somebody wants to correct David on that statement.
So.
All right, hippie nerd wants to know: are those the longest push rods you've ever seen?
At this point, yes. I'm sure a locomotive will have longer ones. I know their physical rod. I mean, even a small locomotive will be, in here. We saw that one down at Ron's that was, it was as long as my leg. So it was a good 2.5 feet, 3 feet long. So yeah.
All right. Do you all use Gliptol on performance applications like lifter valleys? Typically polish them. I am wondering if this wouldn't work as well.
Yes.
He says he typically polishes them.
Yeah. So that is the other option. A lot of people will polish those, and it does the same idea, except for the rust side of things. So keep in mind why we're doing it on these low performance motors, if you will, is because they sit most of the time. I would do it. If I to go back, I would do it on, I'll say all of them that we've done at this point, especially on the top side of the motor because you don't have oil sitting there. You have a lot more, it's all down on the bottom of the pan. So.
All right. Donk wants to know, when will you do a diesel engine?
Soon. It is on the list, truly.
I think right now we're really just trying to figure out, like, a big fun part that we've been having with these projects is the, like, not just the engine side of it, but hopefully it going into something and driving down the road. So I think that's sort of the, like, we know we want to do a diesel, but it's we got to find the right project for the right price. And
yeah, so I mean, I have my preference. I have my preference truck that I want to do, and the engine to put into it that is a diesel motor that would be phenomenal.
So stay tuned.
Yes.
We'll see if we can make that happen. Looks like we got one more here. Do you put clear silicone on the thermostat housing alone or on all the cork gaskets?
I put it on pretty much all the gaskets. Now, one of the things that I will do is, depending on where that gasket is at, so for instance, on this side cover, actually let's use the valve cover as a better example. So a valve cover is going to typically come on and off a few times for just general maintenance. So what I will do is I'll silicone one side of that gasket, not both, because I want to be able to basically reuse that gasket. At least it opens up the ability to do that a little more than if you silicone both down, you're buying a new gasket if you just set the valves. So I'll use, and I like using clear silicone because, well, it basically blends in. You don't see a big goober of it. If you do have one, and it wipes up nice, and you don't have to, you're not as worried about if it's orange or red or black or whatever. So that's the main reason I use the clear.
All right, one more question came in. Will you ever do a 4G63? I don't know what that is.
I don't even know what a 4G63 is. But
anybody in the
sure,
room?
Why not?
DSM turbo four-cylinder, like Mitsubishi Eclipse.
Oh,
We need to do a JDM car of some sort, so we'll put it on our list. We'll see if we can make it to something like
absolutely. We will. We need to find something there just to see I'd like to see the differences of some things, and it'd be kind of fun to do
I want to do something with a turbo anyway, so that'd be fun. All right, well, nice work.
Likewise.
Another engine
Likewise.
running.
Another one done and running and salvaged from the salvage yard. This truck was destined for nothing more than a crusher.
Yep.
So I've gotten questions of, why on earth did you save a Stovebolt crap motor for? They were crap when they were built. They were crap now. They'll be crap forever. And you know what? Maybe. But at the same token, now it's a running motor.
Yep.
I'm not going to try to set the world on fire with it by any stretch, or fight any fires with it either. And we're going to enjoy it, and it is what it is. I think the main point of the exercise from my standpoint is there's stuff out there. Don't be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Did we spend more money on this than what we would if we would have went to the local auto parts store and bought a small block Chevy short block? Yes. Yes, we did. But you know what? When somebody pops the hood open on this and looks at it, they won't be, oh, it's another small block Chevy. And I love small block Chevys, but there's something to be said for being not that.
For sure.
So that's my soapbox and and the way we rip. That's what makes it unique and fun.
Well, thanks for watching. If you have any other questions after watching this or later on down the road with it just being posted and that sort of thing, leave them in the comments. We'll do our best to answer those. But in the meantime, keep an eye out for our next project, which is on the other side of that wall right there.
The next two are on the other side of that wall
right
now. And you know what? All those, hey, would you do this? Would you do that? Keep those coming because we listen to you. And those will be coming as well.
There were several comments on this video that were, hey, can you do this? And that's what's on the other side of that wall.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
So yeah, we'll be announcing that via our Redline Update series, and you'll be in on the mix there. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.